Aldermen, ladies and gentlemen, the Mayor, Alderman Chipman.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. To open proceedings tonight, I'll call on our General Manager to recite the Council prayer. Thank you.
Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to vouchsafe Thy blessing upon this Council. Direct and prosperous deliberations to the advancement of Thy glory and the true welfare of the people of the City of Clarence. Amen.
Amen. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Tasmanian Aboriginal community, and pay our respects to elders past and present. Remind everyone also that tonight is, in theory, being audio-visually recorded. We've had a few failures with the technology, but tonight we have a gentleman at the back there monitoring our performance. So if you see somebody doing some recording, taking some measurements, is monitoring our audio-visual system. Hopefully we can get it repaired. Thank you. Declare the meeting open and note that we have an apology from Alderman Newington, who's on leave, and all's present other than that. Item 2 on the agenda, confirmation of minutes for the 21st of October as circulated and taken as read and confirmed. Thanks, Alderman Peters. Second, Alderman Tong. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Mayor's communication. I'd like to table a list of significant appointments over the last 3 weeks. I don't intend to speak to any of them at this meeting, but they will be in the minutes. Item 4, Council notes the workshops conducted on the 28th of October and 4th of November, and also the agenda brief on the 8th of November. If I could have a mover and seconder, please. Alderman Chong. Second, Alderman Mulder. Thank you very much. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 5, declarations of interests of Alderman or close associate. There being none.
Mr Mayor, I'm not sure whether I need to declare an interest in the Australian Coastal Councils Association nomination.
I don't believe you need to declare an interest in it. It may be discreet not to vote, but that's up to you.
Thank you.
I encourage it.
Moving on to item 6, tabling of petitions. General Manager.
We have one petition. The petition is a complying petition from 30 signatories in respect to the extension of the Clarence Foreshore Trail at Cleve Court. The petition is seeking that Council doesn't proceed with the project. I'll provide a report to that at the next meeting.
Thank you very much. Are there any petitions to be tabled from the floor? Thank you. Item 7, public question time. There are no public questions on notice or answers to question on notice. However, there are answers to previous questions taken on notice. General Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. The answers to previous questions on notice have been provided in the agenda, and I propose to just take those as read.
Thank you. 7.4, are there any questions without notice from members of the public? Can you please come forward? And in accordance with procedure, please identify yourself and address before posing your question.
My name is Joanne Marsh and I live at 32A King Street, Bellerive. On November the 2nd, 2019, a person identifying himself as a Clarence City Council alderman had a letter published in the Mercury newspaper. In his letter, he used the term anti-everything brigade, a term previously used by the current Premier of Tasmania. My question is, has the community engagement team, through your say, Clarence, provided Alderman with firm data that indicates that such a brigade exists in the Clarence community and is significant in any way, or is the statement simply hearsay?
Thank you. We shall investigate that. I'm not aware of anything at this point in time, though. But we will have a response in the next minutes.
Thank you.
Next agenda paper, sorry.
Can I just ask that all our guests be treated with respect?
I think that's quite admirable. I support that point of order. Thank you. Are there any other questions from members of the public? Thank you. Item 8, deputations by members of the public. General Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. We have one deputation, Mr Nathan Dark of 19 Dillon Street, Belrive.
Mr Dark, as you come forward, I need to remind you that there's only an opportunity for 3 minutes under our meeting regulations, and there will be a tone of 2.5 minutes to give you a chance to wind up.
Let me know when it starts then.
You start and we'll start the time.
Okay, great, thank you. We purchased our home, 19 Dillon Street, Belrive, in 2002. Growing up in Risdon Vale, Clarence and the Eastern Shore has always been home, and we were thrilled when we had the opportunity to purchase and raise our family there. The current renovation that is underway is a further investment in my family home. I do not own other properties. This renovation and significant personal investment is to maximise the asset, making sure we can continue to live there with our growing family whilst maximising the significant mountain, water and city views. We have seen investment and development in adjacent and surrounding properties, something that we have always supported. It is good for all of us. Unfortunately, this support of those adjacent developments now has not been reciprocated. Our current renovation was designed to be as sensitive to the aesthetic of the area and our neighbours as we could on a very small block. Sunlight and privacy conditions were a factor. Considerations were a factor on the design with the offset upper floor, so sure we didn't affect our neighbours. We also considered the views of our neighbours by going through the DA process originally, as we created a compromised design. We could have used the building envelope to our own benefits and created a very different outcome for them. The actual issue put before you today is about whether, in its simplest terms, is to ask for a glass balustrade to be moved on the upstairs balcony 1,400 millimetres than on the previous DA's proposition. Mitigation for privacy issues has been proposed, including frosting of the glass and subtle landscaping. This area of the balcony seeking amendment does not look into any room of the dwelling 217 Dillon Street. The part of the building where the balcony balustrade is in question is the roof of our kitchen on the bottom floor. We have not extended the original footprint of the area of this building. You will note that this glass balustrade will move 1,400 millimetres towards our neighbours who have endorsed the proposal. You will also note that the block of 19 Dillon Street is quite small. Private open space is extremely limited and the move of the glass balustrade will assist in creating more. The dwelling as it stands would not meet the Clarence City Council recommended private open space criteria. The balcony footprint will be built as originally approved. This is not changing. This is simply to ask if we can now maximise the space of the area of the balcony which acts as our roof. Adjacent developments have been able to develop in ways which overlook into my dwelling at 19 Dillon Street on all sides. Upon meeting with Clarence City Council planner Lisa Balding, one of her concerns has been the glass balustrade move could possibly impact a future potential neighbour. This is not a legitimate argument in our opinion. I simply ask for common sense to prevail, for you to consider favourably for this DA amendment to pass. It is simply a glass balustrade move of 1,400 millimetres. Thank you very much.
Moving on to item 9, motions of notice. Alderman Mulder.
I move the motion of which I've given notice.
Do we have a seconder, please? Yes, I'll second. Thank you, Alderman James.
Mr Mayor, this is a motion in accordance with a council policy for the removal of trees on public land. A policy that some years ago was changed from one where the arborist report was all that mattered to one where community concerns and considerations about the location of the tree and its appropriateness to the site were to be done. This particular tree has in turn, through that process, an application to remove it has been made by the adjacent landholders at 58 St Helens Street, who were going to make a deputation, but they unfortunately haven't made it back in time for the earlier council meetings we have these days. Now, the issue with it is that the structure, although recommended for pruning, the tree has multiple leaders at ground level and therefore is an elevated risk of rot and splitting. As accordance with the policy, there was consultation with 6 of the neighbours in the area, and not one came back and said we support retention of the tree. There's also a policy checklist that council has, as can be seen from the report that in the weekly briefing reports. There are 12 items on that policy checklist, which are cases where there has to be a strong support for retention of the tree. This tree met none of those criteria, so therefore there is no urgent policy route to do it. Just as a final point, since climate change is the way to go, it's important to remember that young growing trees absorb more carbon dioxide than mature trees. And although it's the removal of a tree, it is actually, the technical term is a replacement of the tree, because council has an obligation to, once this tree is removed, to actually replace it with at least one and preferably more trees. Now, there are more suitable trees to these giant eucalypts that are more suitable to the streetcoats. A well-trimmed blackwood tree, for example, provides good shade without the risk, and it is quite an attractive and native species. Leatherwoods, for example, can form a similar function, although not quite as dense in foliage. And as we all know, there's deep concern about the role that bees play and how important they are. So even in urban communities, I think there are capacity to replace trees. There are even capacity to replace them with fruit-bearing trees in certain locations, so that they are productive trees. So I just commend the motion to the council.
Thank you. Alderman Jones.
No, thanks.
Motion as moved by Alderman Mulder. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. 9.2, notice of motion, Alderman Mulder.
Well, on a roll, Mr Mayor. I move the amendment standing in my name, which
Should
is...
we have a seconder, please? Thank you, Alderman Kennedy.
Clearly I need to do more homework on, on lobbying my peers. This is Council's current policy, the one that I referred to in the previous debate, has a period of 4 weeks from publication in the briefing note as to when a motion can come before Council to vary the arborist recommendation. With a number of trees that this occurs, and in this particular case, notices of motion have to be lodged on the Friday before the council meeting. So in the case of the previous motion, I had to have that lodged not last week Friday, but the week before. This particular report came out, the report that I referred to as an example, came out in the weekly briefing notes of the Wednesday. I had 2 days to work out whether or not to move this particular motion. And you could say that would be up to the people who had been the result of this adverse decision by the council staff. But Mr Mayor, these people didn't even know that the refusal had been made, yet it appeared in the briefing reports, and it appeared on my desk on the Friday, which gave me, all of about 5 minutes to hastily throw something together to get this in time. Now, effectively, this could be as short as 2 days' notice when the people who haven't been advised of the decision. So this would give you, by pushing that out to 3 council meetings, we have sufficient time for the people to have been notified, who may be aggrieved by the decision, to approach the councillors or their neighbours and seek some support for an overturning of that decision. And I think that 3 council meetings is an appropriate time, given the fact that 2 days is clearly not.
Other speakers? Okay, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Oh, that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Notice of motion, Alderman Edmonds.
So moved.
Do we have a second? Thank you, Alderman Jones. Alderman Edmonds.
The retraction,
Sorry?
Alderman Walker.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misheard that. You want to retract?
No,
He won't do seconded.
Alderman James, it's Alderman Walker.
Alderman James Walker.
Let me sort of pick up on this again. Moved Alderman Edmonds, seconded Alderman Walker. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Before I make some very brief remarks, I'd like to read a letter from a parent in our city called Bridget Lockley, who wrote to me last Wednesday. She writes, I would like to address the immediate need to take action to ensure that all access playgrounds in the Clarence area are in fact all access. As far as I'm aware, we have only 2 playgrounds that were designed to be fully accessible. Unfortunately, in my opinion, these playgrounds require further consideration, as do many of the other playgrounds in our area. I have 2 young daughters, aged 3 and 4, and we spend a lot of time meeting friends to play at the park. Due to a rare gene change, my 3-year-old daughter has multiple brain abnormalities and as a result has low muscle tone. This means she's unable to safely and comfortably enjoy the many swings that are offered at most parks in the Clarence area. For a typically developing child, going to the park is an excellent way to explore their world both socially and independently, with many families understandably taking this experience for granted. Going to the park for my family is not a seamless process. Holding a 3-year-old in the baby swings and allowing the swing to move slightly is disheartening. Sitting her on the grass to observe other children in the park is a good social modelling opportunity, but also heartbreaking. There are a few basket swings offered at parks around our area, but these swings do not allow Rosie to sit up with her friends and explore her world visually. She has to lie down. I would love to see Rosie's physical needs recognised and catered for, and for her to experience social enjoyment by sitting in a swing beside her sister or friends. By sitting independently in the swings beside her peers, Rosie will be part of the group, therefore feel valued and accepted. Rosie also has a vision impairment, and it is important that she learns to use her vision in a variety of ways. Sitting up and using it whilst in motion is a very important one. Activating her vestibular system is extremely important for her development, hence the regular use of the swing. Rosie loves swinging. It has always been one of her favourite activities, but in the Clarence area she has never had a fulfilling social experience of this. On a recent trip to Perth, we were delighted to find a park with several all-access disability swings. Rosie was thrilled to have some independence, and we were grateful for the opportunity to be more hands-on with our other daughter as well. We spend a lot of time in our own backyard as it is a safe and accessible area for Rosie, but it would be beneficial in many ways for our family to be able to go to a park where both of our children have the same freedom of choice for equipment, more specifically in this instance, an all-access swing. A park that provided this so freely would be an area for all community members where, regardless of ability, they could socialise, feel safe, comfortable, and most of all valued. So in summary, ready access to these swings would provide independence, enjoyment, safety, comfort and quality of life for my daughter and many other community members in the Clarence area who require additional physical supports. Kind regards, Bridget Lockley. Mr Mayor, I don't have a lot to add to Bridget's letter, and after reading it I hope colleagues understand the difference that just one swing can make. An obvious question is, why now? And why not wait for the next budget cycle? To answer that, I've asked previous questions and sought information through Alderman's requests on the state of all abilities play in our city, and since then I've worked with our landscape architect, GM and CFO to refine the original motion, including having Simmons Park as the recommended location for this swing. I've also received advice from parents, disability workers and other Tasmanian councils that already has this swing. Obviously we're outside the budget cycle, so the ask here is simply for a swing that retails at about $1,000 inclusive of GST, in time for International Day of People with a Disability and of course the summer and school holidays, where children will want to use this equipment. Over summer, I'll work with colleagues and officers and members of the public on a motion to invest far more into genuine all-access, all-abilities equipment. Mr Mayor and colleagues, this motion is about one all-abilities swing, but is about so much more than that. It is a signal of intent that this council will not put children with disabilities off to the side and ignore their right to participate in play with their friends and family. It is a message to these children and their families that will do more to help in a space that has gone ignored and more likely misunderstood for a very long time, and I commend the motion.
Thanks,
Thank you. Look, it's hard to add much more to the letter and Alderman Edmonds' words. I would say that in my time on council, the council has been making steps and being better in this space and providing more opportunities. I remember back in the dark ages campaigning on an all abilities playground. Simmons Park, I guess, was the first park where we started to embrace more of these concepts. Originally, what had been at Simmons Park was a good gesture in the form of a Liberty Swing, but a Liberty Swing which does, if you like, allow people in wheelchairs to enjoy the freedom of swing is an isolated and separate play experience. And there were issues around the key and how that detracted from the experience. So that was the first instance where some concepts and principles started to be considered, and we obviously ratcheted it up with the Bellerive Beach All Abilities Playground. Things like the carousel on the ground and other things have really been an improvement in the space. And when we think about all abilities playgrounds, obviously whilst our focus is on the children, it can also be allowing parents, grandparents and other people that might be of a range of physical levels to participate in that experience and play. And if you deny that opportunity as a parent, that's also something that I think would be regrettable. So this is a small quantum of funds that's being requested. I think we have come a good way, and I think I think whilst we can be proud of that, there is opportunities to always learn and do better, and I think this is part of that process. And again, how's this swing going to work? Well, it sounds like from the letter, you can have two siblings playing together, one on one swing and one the other, straight together with the parents, which is something that should be available wherever possible. So we're moving forward, and I think this motion is just resharpening the tools on it as well as improving it. So I commend it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to congratulate the mover of the motion. I had the honour of being chairman of Variety Tasmania when we installed, or when Variety installed, Liberty Swing in Simmons Park, and I know firsthand the joy that brought to so many lives that hadn't before that swing had become available, able to enjoy the very basic enjoyment of swinging. And I would also acknowledge too that my colleague Alderman Kennedy was at that time a national ambassador for Variety, the children's charity, and it was our dream as here in Tasmania to roll those swings out across the state, and I'm pleased to say that a fair amount of them are around Tasmania and around the country. This is a fantastic first step, Mr. Mayor, but I think, and I'm sure that the mover would agree with me as he said in his opening remarks, there is more that needs to be done in this space. And just like Jack, the Duffy family in Launceston in recent times have installed other equipment there too, which is all abilities. And I think there's a lot of work that we ought to do in this area to ensure that the enjoyment is available to everyone. And I think it's a fantastic first step. For me, it's a no-brainer, and the sooner we see this underway, the better. So happy to support it, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a good motion, and in fact, it actually goes to the heart of what development has occurred in Simmons Park over the years. And I might add that council has invested close to $2 million over the years in relation to Simmons Park, and also too it has expended something in the vicinity of $1 million on the Bellerive Beach Park and also the latest irrigation of that area. Mr. Mayor, the question in relation to the installation of the swing, I think it's appropriate for it to be installed there. I'm hoping that it will be installed by December 3, and that in fact is very close, and I don't know whether the staff are in a position to be able to actually have that done by then, but I'm sure if this motion gets up tonight that in fact that can be done. The other thing that I will raise, and that's in relation to ongoing assessment in relation to other regional parks, and of course we have Bellerive Beach Park, which is a regional park, and there are others that are in the throes of being either upgraded or considered as part of that park development. So I would like to think that perhaps even in the budget process, although we may be cash-strapped with a number of these other projects that are listed for consideration in the budget process next year, that perhaps the all-ability swing can be, one of these can be installed in the Belrive Beach Park area for the use of other people and also for people who have a disability. I support the motion, and I believe it's appropriate that we should consider it.
Thank you, Mayor, and I do congratulate Alderman Edmonds for bringing this motion and the letter. I thought that was really great because we did have the Liberty Swing at Simmons Park, and you know, once we did the park up, I hadn't thought much of it, but now you brought this motion and that letter, I think it's something we've certainly got to look at. Alderman James mentioned the park at Kangaroo Bay as well, and I think that's another good starting point where a lot of families do go. So I certainly support this motion. Going ahead.
Very brief. I think there's no doubt people's hearts have been in the right place historically, and there's been a lot of good gestures and goodwill. And as I touched on in my speech, there might just be a little bit of misunderstanding. And I think to sort of put a flag in the ground to say we're going to work on this with everyone going forward is a good way to go. Obviously, people have mentioned Kangaroo Bay or Belrive Beach. Basically, I took the advice of officers for one, to keep the cost low, to make the money easier to reallocate, and we can go forward with some of that stuff in the next budget process. And in terms of the question about being ready, I think the order's basically up on the screen just waiting for us to vote and will be clicked on tomorrow. And the supplier has given, seems quite comfortable with those timelines. Thank you.
So the motion is from Alderman Edmonds in regard to the all-ability swing. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 9.4, notice of motion, Alderman Walker.
Yes, I move that Council amend the consolidated meeting procedures to reduce the number of notices of motion allowable per alderman per meeting from 2 to 1.
Do we have a seconder, please? Thanks, Alderman Pearce.
Look, I'll try and keep it fairly short and sweet. Members of the public attend council meetings for a variety of reasons. There are some that come to every meeting, you know, whatever the weather. And yeah, irrespective of what's on the agenda or the length of the meeting, they'll come without fail, and that's great. However, there are many that do attend for specific issues that are impacting on their immediate situations, and that often relates to planning matters. I've noticed that it's often taking well past 90 minutes sometimes to get past the notices of motion section, and I guess my intent of this motion is that it does place a floor on the total cap of notices of motion that can be discussed around a meeting, from a theoretical 24 to a theoretical 12. And in doing so, I guess it helps sharpen our mind on the issues we want to bring. Now, there may well be a time when when an alderman has two incredibly urgent and meritable notices they wish to bring forward. In that instance, obviously, they retain the ability to work with their colleagues and to discuss with their colleagues, and perhaps allow one of their colleagues to move that motion on their behalf. And after all, that's the reason notices of motion come up, I'm sure, for the greater good of the community. There might be some reasons why people might not be comfortable with this motion. One reason that might come forward is that they believe there's a better way to address the voluminous nature of motions rather than cutting it from 2 motions per alderman per meeting to 1. And that may very well be the case, but I don't think you're going to get a more elegant, efficient or simplistic way forward than doing what I'm suggesting. There may be some aldermen that are of the view that this is an encroachment on freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Now, you can make that argument, I guess, but if you're going to make that argument, you're doing so in the context that there's already a limit of 2, and that applies to also questions. So if that's something that's coming forward, then I would be expecting that such an alderman would foreshadow a follow-up motion that we remove all caps on question time and on notices of motion. So I think this is a sensible and prudent way forward to keep our meeting processes efficient, succinct, whilst allowing aldermen to bring matters of concern ordered it to, if they've got more than one issue that they wish to bring to one meeting to discuss with other aldermen and perhaps have them do so on their behalf. I commend the motion.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I do support this motion, but one of the things I did raise with the General Manager, because most people, I'd imagine, come to this council meeting for mainly development applications. They want to know the result of that. And I'm just wondering if a workshop, because sometimes an alderman, because of time restraints, they do need to bring 2 motions of notice on the same night. And at one stage here, after people had questions without notice, deputations by a member of the public, and about 4 notices of motion, we were 90 minutes before we actually started getting into the development applications, which I think is very unfair on the gallery when they're here to see what's happening with their property or nearby property. So I suggested to the General Manager today, and like to you, Mayor, that maybe we should just have a look at the way our agenda is gone through, and maybe notices of motion do not need to be straight up front. Maybe they can go back further in the agenda. Same with reports and things like that. I mean, obviously you've got to confirm the minutes early in the meeting, I understand all that, but there's certain things I think where we can bring DAs much closer to the front of the meeting, and that would free up the people in the gallery that have made the effort to get here, instead of waiting 90 minutes for their application to be decided. Because tonight, now it's 7:30, it's half an hour, but we've only got 1 DA, so that's a bonus. But you know, when we've got many DAs, I'd just like us to start on those a lot earlier if we could, and maybe a workshop would be, just to discuss it, maybe the way to go.
Thanks, Alderman Pearce. Other speakers? Alderman Jones.
Yes, look, Mr Chairman, it's interesting that the prior speakers did make mention of the fact of the impression that it may be seen to have on the public that notices of motion are not worthy to be considered as in sort of the first part of the meeting procedure. Having said that, over the years it always seems to me that the matters that have been brought up in notice of motion are matters that need to be considered and in the public's interest in the early part of the meeting, because a lot of those issues are extremely important and they have been brought forward by the elected representatives for a very good reason, and that is for discussion in the early part of the meeting in order for the residents or persons who have actually requested those motions to come forward. So if you're going to sort of now move that the number of notices of motion that a elected representative can put forward, or it's going to be basically the first step in what I think is going to be put in jeopardy the democratic process, because by the very nature of being able to put forward 2 notices of motion, they, by the very nature of being put forward, whether they have merit or otherwise, then the council, those good faces around the horseshoe, would be able to determine as to whether they're worthy of discussion and as to whether or not they should be basically lost or not dealt with. So look, there is that sort of element that can be determined as to whether or not it should be left as is, and I believe it should be. And the other basis on which we can talk about reducing the actual role of the elected representative in this place is by going down this path that Alderman Walker is suggesting, by saying, okay, let's reduce it to 1, and then later on we have a possible change to the meeting procedure to say, well, look, unless there is urgency about that notice of motion, or there is some parameters on which a notice of motion should be put forward, you can see that it's going to be on a roller coaster effort that may change and basically dilute the process, and also basically take away one of the key measures that elected representative has by representing the people and by putting forward 2 notices of motion, which are important not only to the community but also to the City of Clarence. I understand where there is this potential for notices of motion can drag out the meeting, But in the past, we've actually suspended standing orders when there has been a matter of significance that needed to be dealt with whilst we've had a large group of people here in this place. So there is that opportunity to suspend standing orders to bring forward a matter prior to the discussion and notice of motion. I think this is not a dangerous move, but it's going to underwrite what I think is part of the democratic process. And as an elected representative, I feel that we should be able to adhere to the meeting procedure and also to be able to convey to the public if they have an issue, which is extremely important. And by doing that in the early part of the meeting, I think that should be maintained. So I will not be supporting this because I believe it's going to start the ball rolling and underline the democratic process in which elected representatives have the right to be able to represent the community, and by doing that with 2 notices of motion.
Thank you. Other speakers? Yes, I will be supporting the motion, but I do have a little concern that it's come to us like this as a motion on notice, which means that we've only got a week to have a look at it. We've only got a week to have a discussion with the person who moved it, and even the seconder and others have pointed out that there are other ways in which a very similar thing could be achieved. Now, this particular, and passing this motion doesn't impact upon that. We can still shuffle it around and we can still have one. I might say that I and maybe 1 or 2 others are frequent offenders of the multiple motions on notice, as I had the one tonight. But I take some comfort in now that I've got more than 2 days to decide whether to put a motion forward, such as the tree one, then I've got a bit more comfort that if I put a motion of notice in and an urgent matter crops up at the last minute, that I can then maybe schedule it for the next meeting rather than this one. So, but I don't know how many other hooks there are in council policies that have those sorts of hooks that could be severely impacted by this. Then again, you can always get someone else to tap them on the shoulder, like I obviously failed to do, and say, listen, would you second this one for me? Instead, you could say, can you move this one for me, and I'll second it for you. So there are easy ways around it, but I really think that whether this motion succeeds or not, that I think we need to probably go back to a workshop and discuss some of the very good suggestions that have been made around the table.
Thank you. Other speakers?
Mr Mayor, when the new council was elected, we actually had a number of councillors, aldermen, who believed that the meetings were going far too long. And they brought this up at a workshop, and we workshopped it, and we looked at a number of aspects in relation to the meeting procedures, and subsequently it was decided not to change the way that the meeting operates. I would have to say that as far as motions on notice or notices of motions, that most of them are not urgent. Most of them could actually be put on an ongoing basis, if you like. So the idea that we need to have 2 notices of motion for each alderman could certainly, and does now, extend the length of the meetings. And I'm aware that a lot of the aldermen actually have a 9-to-5 job, so when they get here of an evening, they've already done a day's work. And I actually think that a number of the matters that come before council as a notice of motion could actually be dealt with initially at a workshop and perhaps progressed without needing to come to a council meeting. So the idea that Alderman Mulder had in relation to canvassing your fellow aldermen before coming to a meeting, I think has a great deal of merit, and that short notice in which to consider matters. As Alderman Mulder and I believe Alderman Walker actually said, if we go to the nth degree with the two motions on notice, then that means that we would actually have 24. And I look forward to that night because I'm going to bring my sleeping bag. So I think we'll need to certainly have some refreshments on hand as well. I'm going to support Alderman Walker's motion because I believe it will streamline the council meetings, and as I said, I feel that we have a number of other options in terms of canvassing the various ideas that aldermen have, and many of them are very good and many of them come to fruition. Thank you.
Alderman Walker.
Mr Mayor, I thank everyone for their contribution, some a bit more than others, but I think that it's been a good debate and we've covered some things. I'm a bit confused again around the slippery slope argument that it's a step towards procedural totalitarianism. The bottom line is everyone can there is a cap now. There is a cap now, and if that cap's an inhibitor, a limiter on speech and representation, then people could have foreshadowed that they wish to undo that cap. All we're talking about is moving it from 2 to 1 and retaining the ability to collaborate with other aldermen in a situation where you feel there are two issues that should be raised. And this I think, is a better way to go forward. So I do seek support, and let's get on with it.
Thank you. So the motion from Alderman Walker is that we amend consolidated meeting procedures to ensure that aldermen can only have one motion on notice for each meeting. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 10, reports from outside bodies. 10.1, reports from single and joint authorities. Copying refuse disposal site joint authority. I note the September quarterly reports pending. Did you want to add to that?
No, looking forward to the meeting.
Thank you. The Tasmania Water Corporation, there will be a owners representative group general meeting in Launceston this week, which I will be attending with the team. Greater Hobart Committee, I have nothing to report. And I'd like to table the draft minutes from the STCA meeting that myself and the GM attended on the 14th of October. Thank you. 10.2, reports from council and special committees and other representative bodies. Are there any? Alderman Blomley.
Mr Mayor, may I first seek some advice from you or the General Manager? I have financial statements of CSL. Should they be tabled rather better tabled in private?
Yes, if we could take that on notice. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And also last Friday the 8th of November, Alderman Kennedy and I attended the Clarendon Vale Neighbourhood Centre annual general meeting, and I'd like to table their annual report.
Thank you. Are there any other reports?
Thanks, John.
Yes, Mr Mayor. I wish to table the minutes of the Clarence Positive Ageing Advisory Committee for the 15th of August as ratified on the 17th of October.
Thank you. Other reports? Reports of officers. 11.1, that the information in the weekly briefing reports of the 21st and 28th of October and the 4th of November be tabled. Thanks, Alderman Blomley. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Speakers, Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a question through you to Mr Graham, and welcome back, Mr Graham. The matter on the 28th of October, cost comparison of the proposed Anzac Park Sports Pavilion, an update on levelling playing field grant. Mr Graham advised of the current situation in relation to this matter, and also option 2, where a new cost estimate was proposed by Sugden and NG using rates from Rawson's Australian Construction Handbook, resulting in an estimate of 4.94 million. Please.
Sorry, I didn't hear a question there.
Yes, so the question is in relation to the item on the agenda, and an update in relation to where we are with this, and is option 2 a consideration, or is it basically still to be decided on, please?
Mr. Mayor, we've received the grant from state government. Council officers are reviewing that. I understand the General Manager, we're going to take it to a council workshop to discuss.
That's correct, and ultimately it'll be a question for budget consideration.
So on that, again, through you, Mayor, to Mr Graham, does that mean that, given that we have received $1 million from the government, I think, does that mean that there is that proposal to take it to budget for the 4.9?
Through Mr. Mayor, we've received the grant proposal from the state government. Council has to agree in the end to signing the grant proposal and how council will fund this project should it finally decide to proceed.
Discussion. I'll put the motion that we note the info in those reports. All those in favour? Carried unanimously.
Mr Mayor, I rise and seek council's support for item 13.4 in closed meeting, Eastside Squash Centre, to be discussed in open council as a procedural motion.
So you've proposed a procedural motion. Do we have a seconder for a procedural motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. It being a procedural motion that we pull 13.4 into open session. All those in favour? Against? The motion is lost. Thank you. Moving on to, we've got nothing at 11.2. So I'd like to advise the council now intends to sit as a planning authority. We have just one item tonight, 11.3.1. Development application at 19 Dillon Street, Belrive. Dwelling additions, alteration to approved deck. Alderman Blimey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I seek leave to move the motion standing in my name.
Do we have a seconder, please, for Alderman Blomley's motion? Thank you, Alderman Pearce. Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, there's not much more I can add to this. The proponent in his deputation hasn't already this evening. Thought that was quite succinct and summed up the common sense approach that's being proposed in my motion this evening. Just to briefly recap, Mr. Mayor, in its simplest terms, what this motion asks for is the glass balustrade on the upstairs balcony to be moved 1,400 millimetres more than the previously approved DA position of that balustrade. The balcony footprint in question, Mr. Mayor, will be built as approved. This is not changing. This is simply asking for the proponent to be able to maximise the space of the area of the balcony, which acts as their roof, by having the glass balustrade moving rather from the arbitrary line that's there at the moment to the edge of the balcony that has been built. Mitigation of privacy issues have been proposed, including frosting of the glass and subtle landscaping on the balcony. This area of the balcony seeking amendment does not look into any room on the adjoining property. Mr. Mayor, a number of us, indeed I think all of us, have been to the property and spoken with the proponent and indeed neighbours. And we would be aware from those visitations and site visits that those that have made representations are not affected by this amendment at all. They cannot see the balcony from their residence, nor can the people that utilise the balcony see into those properties that have made representations. The one property that is that may be affected has actually signed a letter that they provided to council saying that they are supportive of the movement of this balustrade. So, as I say, Mr. Mayor, the balcony footprint will be built as approved. That's not changing. All we're asking for here in this motion is a common sense approach, Mr. Mayor, that will allow this family to fully enjoy the amenity of that balcony. I heard earlier tonight on the radio, Mr Mayor, that rules are guidelines and common sense must prevail. So, Mr Mayor, when common sense rules, sanity...
Alderman Blomley, I do need to remind you that this being a planning issue, we have to comply with the planning scheme.
I'm talking about common sense planning outcomes, Mr Mayor. I don't need any help from colleagues, thank you.
Order. Please continue.
So, Mr Mayor, this is asking for a common sense approach, one that is within our bailiwick of discretion to provide. The proponent has worked very closely with our planning staff, I'm sure, and that's been noted. This would be the outcome that would allow the proponent to fully enjoy the amenity of quite a significant build and improvement to that part of Belrive. I seek colleagues' support for this motion.
Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. And as Alderman Blomley said, look, it's only a very minor amendment, and the person that's you'd think be affected has actually signed a letter saying they're quite happy with it. So I think for such a small change, I see nothing wrong with it whatsoever, and I went and had a look at the site, I dare say, like most aldermen did.
Other speakers. Alderman Jones.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. The question in relation to what the rules are, guidelines, and in fact what common sense should prevail are completely out of the context with what has been discussed and put forward by the officers in this particular case. The officers have made their recommendation on strict planning principles, and really it's basically been covered in detail on page 26 when we're looking at the performance criteria in relation to the matter, and it says, and I quote, "The proposed measures to minimise the overlooking are not considered to satisfy the performance criteria for the following reasons. The 1 metre high balustrade is not considered adequate to minimise direct views into the private open space and to the deck of the dwelling at 217 Dillon Street, and the use of pot plants is unsuitable as they do not provide permanent screening." So the balcony is part, and the deck and the roof terrace, a parking space or carport, and that has a finished surface or a floor level more than 1 metre above natural ground level, must be screened or otherwise designed to minimise overlooking of a dwelling on an adjoining lot. So the planners have made it quite clear that it does not agree with the acceptable solutions, and has been confirmed by on page 26 that it does not meet the planning scheme provisions, and also too the performance criteria is quite clear that it does not meet the planning provisions. I seek council's support, and if this motion is lost, I will move the officer's recommendation.
Other speakers. Alderman Morrow.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think we need to just have a look at this particular thing, and it's right. It's the key issue is the 1 millimetre high balustrade is not considered adequate to minimise direct views into the private open space. Now, like some of you, I've been there. I spoke to the builder today, and I spoke to the neighbours on either side. And might I say that both of them, all the people I spoke to were quite sensible, they had valid points, and I think that they should be taken into consideration. Neither should they be dismissed because the direct impact isn't on them. The planning scheme requires us to advertise these planning matters broadly. In other words, the whole community is entitled to have a view on whether they think this particular development is appropriate to our city, whether they're impacted or not. So I really would make that point. The other point is that it seems to me that if the 1 metre high balustrade was extended to 1.8, a lot of the officers' recommendations would have been done. But since the people on the bottom side haven't raised those sorts of objections, and they always have the capacity to plant a few trees along the fence line if they wish screening, those sorts of things can be done. So, look, on balance, I've listened to both sides of the argument, and I think both have some merit, but I think that we are right in the end that the people most affected, we should perhaps give some more weight to them. If they had objected, I would be standing here arguing for the officer's recommendation. But despite the fact that I'm not allowed to mention common sense in terms of addressing the planning scheme, I will simply indicate my support for the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Mulder. Other speakers? Alderman Gomberto.
Mr Mayor, when our planning officers actually look at a planning application, they assess it in great detail, and they are as objective as they can be, particularly as far as the performance criteria are concerned, because that is by nature, or they are by nature, much more subjective. In the years that I've been on council, it is not all that often that we actually have a refusal from the officers. Because, as I say, they consider very carefully the acceptable solutions, and then they look even more carefully at the performance criteria. They are very clear in relation to this particular matter, and I believe that if we were to go against this recommendation, then we are actually, without further information and more detailed information, suggesting that the officers and their expertise in this particular area are not to be considered. And I do not agree with that. I feel that the reasoning that has been put forward is very clear, and I will be supporting the officer's recommendation rather than the contrary.
Thank you, Alderman Gomberto. Other speakers?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I thank colleagues for their contributions this evening. I'll just be very brief in what I say here, but those of us, Alderman Mulder was quite correct, the whole community does have a say in this. And I think when one has to assess these matters, if they can't have a common sense approach, at least they should have a fair approach, Mr Mayor, and look at precedents also in that, particularly along Dillon Street, when one talks about balcony setbacks, etc. But I will just make the point, Mr Mayor, as is covered in my motion there at points B, 2 and 3, the two representations that have been received. One is that the loss of privacy cannot have determining weight, and two, that the height and form of the building cannot have determining weight. So that brings us back then, Mr Mayor, to the issue of whether the proposal meets the scheme's relevant acceptable solutions. And it does. It does. With the exception, Mr Mayor, of the very minor part as to the location of the deck and the screening. That's all we're talking about here. And the person that it will affect is quite all right with the motion before us this evening. Very, very comfortable with that solution, Mr Mayor. This is a neighbourhood that has worked together to arrive at the best possible outcome to ensure that the whole amenity of the area increases. I seek council support, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. So the motion from Alderman Blomley is for approval subject to a condition. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. That concludes our business as a planning authority. Thanks, Ross. We have no items under customer service. Moving on to 11.5, asset management. (11.5.1) Clifftop risk mitigation funding. Amendments to the passive recreation budget. Moved Alderman Pearce. Second, Alderman Walker. Thank you. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I don't have to go, I think we've been through this many times. This is Clifftop risk mitigation funding. and it's all down here. I think we've discussed it twice, and I think most people are pretty happy with what's coming and going, so I support the motion.
Honourable Walker.
I support the motion with gritted teeth. Time marches on. I look at an area where, 30 years ago or more I used to play, and many other people did. And society, I guess, changes, and if you ask an insurer if something's risky, well, they're going to want to tell you yes if there's anything they can do to limit from their perspective. But this isn't a question of being subjective. If it was, I'd probably be against it. I think our hands are tied. I'm hopeful that we will come up with a level of fencing that is sensitive to the site, that doesn't detract too much from its natural splendour. Several of us were there today for Remembrance Day. It's a really important site, and whilst this is something we have to do, I hope we get to do it right.
I'm in favour of this particular motion because it comes out of a risk assessment. I would like to point out, though, the risk assessment isn't about people deliberately climbing over the rocks and enjoying their pastime, as no doubt Alderman Walker did for many years, or probably not that many years ago, as it would have been for me. But I will say that the important thing is that this is about the risk. The model that Alderman James came to us when this issue first came up, and I think he deserves some credit for bringing this matter forward, was that there was concern that children playing there might chase a ball or something and end up over the cliff, a bit like running out in the driveway onto the road. And I can say that risk is not mitigated by a big beautiful wall or a prison wall that's 6 foot high. That risk is easily mitigated by a series of interlapping barriers, be they vegetation or be they whatever, which don't deny people the right to the capacity to still go down, to clamber over those cliffs and take their risks at their own peril. But what it does is designed to stop people accidentally going down there. So I really think when we come to there, we need something modest that actually mitigates the risk that has been assessed, that has required some form of barrier here, and not go into this is Risdon Prison, we must prevent people, no matter what, who want to climb over into this area from doing that. I mean, it's that balance, I think, between community expectations that I think Alderman Walker was getting at, and I think it's most appropriate. And the way to do that is to say, what's the risk we're addressing, and then make the mitigations fit that to the most suitable, but not over-engineer it, if you can help yourself, Manager of General Assets.
Rod, reply all in pairs? No. So the motion is that we reallocate funds to support fencing at Anzac Park and the Second Bluff. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. 11.5.2 deals with the Infrastructure Tasmania 30-year infrastructure strategy and proposes that we authorise the GM to make a submission. Thank you, Alderman Blomley. Do we have a second, please? Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Blomley, do you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just very briefly, a great deal of work has gone into this, and I congratulate the General Manager and his officers on what I think is a very solid submission.
Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Other speakers? Yes, Alderman James.
I understand that we need to have some guidance and direction from the government, and of course this is far-reaching in many respects, and also too we have included attachment 3, I believe, those other projects that in fact Council has worked on and has submitted to the government over a number of years. And of course, one that I have spoken out on a number of occasions, and also to have had questions regarding the ramps onto the East Tasman Highway, both the on-off and on-off ramps. But anyway, look, it hasn't got a tick in the box as part of this 30-year program, but it does have the Flagstaff Gully Link Road in there, and And that's an interesting one, because when we're talking about the Eastern Regional Transport and so on, then again we probably need to consider some ways in which the Mornington Roundabout, South Arm Highway, and also traffic movements, as obviously as our roads and highways have to handle the increasing number of vehicles on a daily, monthly, yearly basis. So the Flagstaff Gully Link Road may, and it is mentioned in this submission that we are submitting to the government, together with the Mornington Roundabout, the East Derwent Highway upgrade between Grasstree Hill and Bowen Bridge. And I think what encapsulates the other dot point is the public transport projects in the Clarence area. And one that has really been on our agenda for many years, and I think it deserves consideration, is the South Arm Highway. It's an absolute disaster, that road, that highway. And there's been a casualty and many accidents in relation to that. And I would have thought that even though it's not mentioned here and it's not necessarily being considered as part of the appendix or attachment 3 that Council's submitting in behalf of Clarence's project, that the South Arm Highway, obviously between the Police Academy and the Lauderdale Primary School, deserves some recognition, and urgent recognition, and also needs to be considered by the government. But it's not there. It's part of what we have been working on for a number of years, and I think at this stage, let's let it run its course. Let's get the Bridgewater Bridge built or reconstructed and so on, and let's also have some work put in relation to the extension of the highway between the airport roundabout and down to Surreal. I support the recommendation.
Mr Mayor, yes, a 30-year infrastructure strategy. It's only taken the government 5 years to produce the statement that we have before us today, and we don't seem to be too much further down the process of actually building any of the things. And once again, we have to go and remind them that the Eastern Shore exists in terms of roads and projects and things like this. So, you know, how can you not say, how can you not support the strategy? And of course I will. But on the way through, might I say, that this was an election commitment to set up Infrastructure Tasmania, to, like Infrastructure Australia, to take the politics out of the situation, to ensure that projects stacked up on a cost-benefit basis, and that therefore they would proceed. And all those sentiments are expressed in this strategy until it comes to a project that's an absolute cost-benefit failure, and bang, in comes politics again, and we will build it come what may. And those sorts of observations. But in terms of the strategy, it sounds really nice. There's a beautiful vision in there, which I suspect to me looks more like a dream. But there we go, and here we are. Now, if it takes us 5 years to get a strategy with a Hart-Boak-Listow pipeline, I think I'm just wondering how many more years before our budgets see those massive numbers of all the pipeline projects actually funded.
I'll reply, Alderman Blomley. So the motion is that we authorise the GM to make a submission in accordance with the attachment. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to financial management. The recommendation is that the annual plan for 2019-2020 be adopted. Move and second it, please. Thanks, Alderman Blomley. Second to Alderman Chong. Alderman Blomley.
As per the recommendation, Mr.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. The matter of the annual plan, and in particular on page 18, 4.2, the operating expenditure. At rates time, I raised this particular point in relation to employee costs, and I would like to draw my colleagues to 4.2 of that chart and reference 4.2.1, and that is that the estimates for 18-19 were 18.264 million, employee costs, and employee costs for 2019-20 will be 19.6 million. Now, again, we always need to consider a number of factors when we are setting the budget, and I have consistently argued over the years, and I've even put on my election brochure, that we need to keep costs down, the rates down, and so on and so forth. But what is happening here, and I think it's important to note that on page 20 we have the additional resources approved as part of the estimates process, and they are listed there for all and sundry. This is a public document: human resources, operation group, city planning, economic development and marketing, customer contact, community service, and so on. So this point about what I believe is something that we need to monitor, but it doesn't seem to gather any momentum as far as I'm concerned in relation to the costs of employee costs in relation to some of these other expenditures that we need to be addressing. And we have, but not to the extent to which I think we are allowing employee costs to sort of get out of hand, in my opinion. The other point about it is that there is very easy to actually adopt a heading or a position within the council as far as a manager. Now, there is this tendency, in my opinion, to have a manager of, well, we do have one of open space. Years ago we didn't have a manager of open space, we had a manager of reserves and recreation. But that now has changed because we do have other categories within reserves and recreation. So what I'm saying here is it's very easy to run the gauntlet of managers of this and managers of that, and there's a cost factor being brought into play here. And as a result of that, we can see that on page 18 there is this, what I believe, far outweighing any of the other materials costs or other operating leases, to the tune of 1.396 increase in employee costs over the 19-20 year. I say that, I'm concerned about it. I know that other members of the council have their own views on this, and that's their right. And I will continue while I'm in this place to draw attention to the fact that employee costs are going up in numbers, and the costs that are being incurred, I believe we need to do something about it. And again, when it comes to budget time next year, I will consider very carefully the rate increase. And if I don't think it's appropriate, and I have every right to do that, if I don't think it's appropriate, then I will vote, as I have done in the previous years, on the basis that it should be in accordance with CPI increases. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Other speakers? I think it's worth pointing out, and I'll take the opportunity as an alderman to speak on this, that we are a growing city. We grow continually 1% every year, and there has been a period where the staff hasn't increased at all. And that if we want to continue to provide the goods and services to the growing population, there's going to be an inevitable increase in the staff. And like you, Alderman James, I will be watching very, very closely to ensure that that money is spent as efficiently as possible. Any other speakers?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to follow on from that, in that being one of the bigger councils in Tasmania, we actually have a small staff for the size of the council that we are, and that the officers do a sterling job in relation to trying to undertake the projects that we have within our strategic plan and our annual plan. Thank you.
Okay.
Look, councils must always be cost conscious, and again, I would reiterate the benefit of comparing with your peers to see what they might be doing better so that you can learn from them. I think we'd actually benchmark all right, in as much as we tend to be a larger full service council, and comparing with our colleagues, we probably compare pretty well in fact. There's always room for improvement, and we should always be looking to improvement. But I guess if you're not satisfied with what's before you, then I think as aldermen, we're obligated to say these are the bits that should be cut out, these are the bits that should be taken away in order to decrease things. It's all well and good to say, no, it's too high, but you've got to actually back it up with how you, as to what you think's too much and what you think should be taken out to bring it down. That's the job. And if you haven't done that, then I think you should join with me in backing this plan that's before us.
Thank you, Mayor. I was going to say something similar to Alderman Walker, because I totally agree. I think if you're going to make statements like that, you should also back it up. One of the reasons why I actually got on council, because I was extremely tired of the debt that this council had many moons ago, and I think Alderman James would say it's certainly a lot better run these days. It's certainly financially much better than it was in those days. So really, to say that we are growing, and I'm always conscious of our rates and where the money's going. Don't worry about that. I mean, I see ads in the paper, but that's not my job staff-wise. That's why we've got a general manager. That's his job. And, you know, I totally support him. And, of course, we are growing, as the Mayor said, 1% every year. So, you know, I see our staff and I know how hard-working they are. So, you know, I think they do a great job.
I reply, Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, there's probably not much more I can add to that, except to say what I said when we discussed the budget earlier this year, and that is that I am constantly amazed at the high level of service this council is able to deliver to our residents and ratepayers. Constantly amazed. We, as you quite correctly pointed out, Mr Mayor, our population increases. Our services have to also rise to match that. In order to do that, our staffing levels rise. And lo and behold, our wages bill rises as well. But our rate base increases. It is, you know, our balance sheet is something to behold. It's something that we all ought to be, quite rightly, very proud of. The CFO and her team and the General Manager have done a sterling job, the executive team here, over many, many years. The growth that this city has experienced in recent times and the continual high level of service, and sure, there's areas for improvement, there always is, but that's our job, to ensure that council meets the needs of our residents and ratepayers. Bit of selective quoting, Mr Mayor, I've got to say too, from the annual plan. I'll go across the page.
As long as it's not new material.
To page number 9. Well, it's actually in response to the points made by one of the previous speakers. Go across the page, number 19, where employee costs are forecast to increase due to a number of factors. Council's EBA commitments provides for general increase in pay rates for council staff. Additionally, the council foresees an increase in the required workforce in order to continue providing the highest standard of services to the municipality. This is not rocket science, Mr Mayor. We should all hold our heads high, knowing that this organisation is an exemplar in this state. An exemplar. And instead of knocking this organisation, we all ought to be very proud of the fantastic council that Clarence City Council is.
Thank you. So the motion is that we adopt the annual plan for 2019-2020. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Moving on to governance items. 11.7.1, welcoming cities, that council becomes a signatory to the standard and a member of the network. Alderman Walker.
I wish to move an alternate or possibly procedural, and that is that on the basis that the 38-page Welcoming Cities standard document has been omitted from the agenda, and that the officer's report doesn't include the commitments council is agreeing to undertake, that council defer this matter for up to 2 meetings so as to enable due process and consideration.
I have a second for Alderman. Thank you, Alderman Pearce. I'll take it as a procedural motion, so therefore I'll put the motion. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Against? The motion is lost. Do I have someone willing to move the procedural motion? Thank you, Alderman Bromley. Seconded. Alderman Warren. Would you like to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor. No.
Alderman Warren.
Just to say that we did discuss this in a workshop, and I feel that we have the information we need to make a decision.
Yes, Mr Mayor. I actually got a copy when the workshop was on. It was available to all of the aldermen. I've certainly read it, and I have no issues in terms of it not actually being attached. The report is quite clear in the commitment that we're undertaking initially and what we can work towards. And I would be very concerned if this is not actually supported unanimously. Thank you.
Walker.
Well, I won't be supporting it. And largely this is going to fall down principally more than anything to process. I'm quite amazed at the number of months that have passed since we discussed this at a workshop to it coming to council. A significant amount of time compared to the usual process. Not only that, but as I said, the actual document isn't in the agenda, which is quite unusual, and the report is quite cursory and indeed doesn't actually spell out the commitments council is going to undertake. I put it to you that by not delaying this for up to 2 meetings, that council is putting itself at risk of perceptions around bureaucrativism around the timing of when it's been put on the agenda. And I think that's very disappointing. So I won't be supporting the motion.
Right of reply, Alderman Bromley.
I didn't take advantage of my first shot, Mr Mayor, so there isn't really a great deal more to respond to, except to say that I actually wasn't present when Mr Franks presented to workshop. I had another engagement, so I actually met with him one-on-one 2 days after that on the Wednesday and got a thorough briefing, a thorough understanding as to what the different levels are. And this motion, of course, signs us up or commits us, Mr Mayor, to that first level, which is committed. That means that we simply sign a statement of commitment that we will be a city that celebrates and welcomes diversity and inclusiveness. That's what this is about. It's about sending the right message that Clarence is open. We're open and we accept you and we want you to be part of our community. And Mr Mayor, on that basis, I have absolutely no problem supporting this motion.
Thank you. So the motion is the recommendation that council becomes a signatory of the standard and a member of the network. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. 11.7.2 Australian Coastal Council's Committee of Management vacancy. Essentially I'm calling for nominations to be one of the 2 state representatives. And one of those could be from Clarence City Council if we choose to nominate. Alderman Bromley.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to nominate Alderman Bomberto.
Thank you.
I'll second that nomination.
Second. Okay. Are there any other nominations? Alderman Bomberto, are you willing to take the nomination?
Very much so.
Okay, in the absence of any other nominations, I will declare you our nominee. 11.7.3 partnership grants. The council approves $15,000 to CODA for its Piecing It Together project. Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Second, Alderman Walker. Would you like to speak to it?
I don't think so, Mr Mayor. I think it's self-explanatory.
Thank you. Alderman Walker.
It's a great project and I think it's really good value.
Other speakers.
Just to say, Mr Mayor, I really look forward to the outcome and the opening. I think that will be marvellous for our city.
I will put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.7.4 Declaration of Belreef Park, Beach Park and surrounding areas as smoke-free under the Public Health Act of 1997. We're looking at option 3 as the recommendation. Do I have a mover and seconder, please? Thank you, Alderman Warren. Do I have a seconder? Alderman Kennedy, thank you. Alderman Warren, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just to say that the arena itself has to be smoke-free because of its status. It makes sense not to then have all the exits clogged by smokers so that everyone can enjoy a healthy and smoke-free environment. I think we've made a sensible option where people can go and smoke if they so desire without impacting those people who don't want to breathe second-hand smoke. I commend the motion.
Yes, look, interesting option 3, which has been the officer's recommendation, which has been moved and seconded by the elected reps. The option 3 includes the dog-free area on the beach, and that you're on page 256 of the agenda. Paragraph 2.4, the dog-free area of Bellreef Beach is popular for families and is used for exercise programs. Therefore, it would be sensible to include this in the declaration. Declaring a complete area as smoke-free would assist in making it clear to the public while simplifying signage and enforcement. So if we turn to option 3, you can see that currently where it's a dog-free beach, which is actually to the low water mark, it means that people are not able to actually smoke on the beach, and if they are just I suppose just from a direction perspective, 100 metres beyond where that dog sign is, they can smoke. So you can have people, and this is the difficulty I have with this, if it had been moved into the dunes, and therefore you would have had the whole of Bellreef Beach Park and the Blunston Arena and also Church Street, I've got no difficulty with that. But to actually take it to the low water mark on the beach proper, you're going to have... who's going to patrol that? Who in the hell's going to be able to patrol that? Because you're going to have the rest of the beach, which is in close proximity to the Oval, to the Blunston Arena, being able to smoke and have fires and have any other activity. But then, on the section of the beach up to the along Victoria Esplanade, to that point there in Chapman Street, that is smoke-free as well. So what is the sense of that? I understand, and we've had workshop after workshop on this, and I know that we need to do something with the Blunston Arena and also those surrounding streets, but why in the hell do we need to go to the beach where it's the gathering point of families and other activities? You know, I've been in this place for a while now, and I've basically thought about the freedom in relation to what you do on the beach. You know, we tried to ban beach cricket a few months ago. At the end of the day...
Alderman James, I think it is misleading. Certainly there was a order that went out, but it didn't ban beach cricket as we know it. And it hasn't been enforced along those lines either.
It hasn't, but it caused a lot of controversy, I must say. But at the end of the day, I think that it's quite ridiculous to actually impose upon the beach to stop people smoking when in actual fact a better compromise would have been for the dunes and the play park and the Blunston Arena. For that reason, unfortunately, I cannot support this.
Now, I have a question, if I may, of the previous speaker.
Well, you can go through me.
Well, sure. Well, there was mention of fires on the beaches. Whereabouts on the diagrams that we've been provided with are fires regularly lit on the beaches, on Bellreef Beach?
I'll take that as a rhetorical question because it's not able to direct a question to somebody as part of the debate. It can be addressed in the summing up by the move of the motion. Otherwise, we could get into a dialogue on every single issue around the place. And it just
all right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm just concerned about. Let's just keep it truthful, please.
Yeah, rhetorical questions been noticed. I'm sure the mover will address it, may address it in the summing up. Other speakers? Alderman Moller.
This is always awkward to enforce and awkward to police, but I can assure Alderman James that through you, Mr Mayor, but I'm assuring him through you, that under all the arrangements and under all the things, the only time you can't smoke on Bellareve Beach is at high tide. The rest of the time you can wander down and smoke between low tide and high tide. That's the farcical nature of trying to draw lines on maps where you can't do things. I have long argued in both this place and another place with which I was associated that the way to deal with public smoking is to ban public smoking and create areas of designated smoking areas so that those areas can be designed and meet the requirements so that you don't get secondary smoke. But that is not what we're doing here, and therefore we're left with this complicated mess of trying to work out, that a bus stop every other day of the year seems fine to smoke at, except when there's a football match on. And those are the sorts of issues. But, I'm sorry, that's not our job to set those policies. Our job is to try to implement them in as practical a way as possible, and I think this probably gets us close to practical, but of course common sense, of course I'm not allowed to talk about that.
Any items no longer. Okay, Alderman Walker.
Yeah, look, I was the only alderman that voted against the concept plan that went out for discussion, and I did so because of deep concerns that whilst the stadium might be washing its hands of smokers within the stadium and meeting its obligations, it was just basically a push back into the suburbs. And the idea of you having someone outside your premises for 10 minutes while they're smoking, I don't think that's very pleasant. And does this in some way increase that? It does, and I'll wait till the end of the debate to decide which way I go on it. But I do believe through the process there has been a degree of mitigation, and I'd ask through you, Mr Mayor, to the General Manager and all appropriate officers, is it correct that with option 3 there's a significant area, if you like, between Beach Street and Bellareve Beach, that section that isn't shaded near the oval, near that car park, that smoking is permitted?
Through you, Mayor, that is correct. The proposal for option 3 also will have 2 carve-outs, potentially, one on Church Street and one on Derwent Street. They're not shown on there, but they are to be negotiated with Tasmanian Cricket.
Okay, so that's potentially. But also, if we go back to the Beach Street and area and just near sort of that car park, if you like, that backs on towards Beach Street. That's an area that hasn't been shadowed, so
that will be available.
So by proxy, that is effectively can work as a designated smoking area.
That's the intention.
And is it also the intention that appropriate receptacles, etc., will be there to minimise cigarette butt disbursement, etc.? Okay, all right.
In the area where that car park is.
Yep. All right. Okay. Well, thank you for that.
Thanks. Other speakers. Alderman Evans, sorry I missed you there.
Absolutely fine. No worries. I think my comment on this is that communication will be the key, as it often is. I reckon we should work with the venue to have like a postcard or something that really spells this out in really clear terms once you come up with what the carve-outs are, so that everybody is pretty unequivocal in where they can and can't smoke and doesn't have the sort of shrug their shoulders that he was lit up as well. We've got to live in the real world, and the perfect policy won't really work with smoking. So we've got to, as I think a few other aldermen have referred to, I'd much rather have areas where you could smoke to mean that people who don't want to be exposed to it can stay absolutely clear. And I'll keep an eye on how this goes at Hurricanes and Kangaroos games and report back if no one else does.
Thanks, Alderman Evans. Other speakers. Alderman Warren.
Thank you. I'd like nothing better than to ban smoking everywhere in public, but good luck with policing that if you think this would be difficult to enforce. I'd like to see how you would go enforcing a total ban on smoking. I thank Alderman Edmonds for his suggestions. I think a sensible communication strategy is key to this, and it's easy enough to make sure that anyone entering the grounds, which they do through very set points, is aware of that information. Alderman James asks, why would we ban it where families gather on the beach? And I would say, why wouldn't you ban it where families gather on the beach? I would have thought that was a perfect example of where there are people who use the beach and the playground who have no interest in what's going on in the stadium. We don't want the entire stadium full of smokers to come down to the beach because it's the closest smoking area. So I think it's essential that we carve out that bit as well and restrict it to the far side, the beach side. So I commend the motion.
Thank you. So the recommendation is the officer's recommendation for option 3. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. Moving on to item 12, Alderman's question time. 12.1, 12.2 and 12.3. There's no activity there. 12.4, answers to questions without notice from the previous council meeting. The answers have been included with that, and I'd like to assume that they'll be taken as read. Moving on to questions without notice. Alderman Warren. We'll start with Alderman Jones.
Yes, thank you. As a follow-up to the question without notice, and that was on page 269, UTAS has entered into a memorandum of understanding with Shamroot to develop the site. My question is, what financial contribution and or otherwise will UTAS be making to the partnership between Shamroot Petrochemical and also and UTAS, please?
I say quite categorically we're not privy to that information. Do you have a second question?
Yeah, okay.
That's if there's been any transfer of obligation at all. I just don't know.
Other item I would like to pose to Mr Lovell, and that is in relation to the officer's recommendation in relation to planning matters. Mr Lovell, given the decision in relation to Dillon Street this evening, how is it that officers are able now to look at matters that pertain to the planning scheme and which are quite specific, and then make a determination that is contrary to it?
Look, I don't think that's an appropriate question for Mr Lovell.
Give us a go.
I think that's a matter for the council, that the officers certainly can make a recommendation, but it's a council decision. But I'll ask the General Manager.
Thank you for the question.
Yes.
I think in terms of council officers, what you're implying is that we ignore the planning scheme and make our own decision. I can absolutely assure you that that is not the case. Officers are required to do the job required by law, and that is exactly what we do. I find the question somewhat affronting.
Do you have a question, Alderman Von Berto? Alderman Evans?
Yes.
Job. Please continue.
Today I was watching TV and Tony Barber was there talking about St Anne's Living, and he one of the pictures he made in the ads is that you own the land, we pay the rates. Can I get clarification whether that's false advertising or not?
I'm sorry.
Can I have the question
I'll
again?
start again. So today on TV, Tony Barber...
can you ask the question that you want answered rather than comment on Tony Barber?
Today there was advertising by St Anne's Living that you own the land, we pay the rates. Is that truthful advertising?
You own the land. Who are you referring to?
He's telling me, the viewer... The residents. Yeah. And that St Anne's pay the rates. And I wonder if that is a truthful comment.
Thank you. The answer to the question will depend upon whether St Anne's is a charitable organisation or not, registered charity, and if it is, then it's eligible for a rates exemption, and in that circumstance no rates would be paid on that particular land.
No general rate?
No general rates, yeah. So I don't make any assumption as to whether the statement you heard was correct or not.
Thank you. Alderman Bromley?
I've got a second question.
Oh, sure.
Are we allowed to still?
No, Alderman Edmonds has got a second question.
We're allowed to.
Be patient, please.
Yeah, this is about flammable cladding, which has got a lot of national, international and local coverage. I'm aware that the state government might be compiling a list of non-compliant buildings. I wonder if there's been any communication with the council about whether there are buildings in Clarence that have this dangerous cladding.
Not that we're aware of. That's not to say that there may not be something that we're unaware of, but certainly we haven't been advised of anything to my knowledge.
Alderman Bromley?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, my question, without notice, regards Alderman's requests and the turnaround time. I know that we had some teething problems with the new IT system. We've signed off on a customer service charter a number of meetings ago, which is all well and good. And I think that on the whole it works well. But I am concerned that there's been one or two Alderman's requests that have slipped through the cracks, and it just becomes embarrassing.
And the question?
Well, the question is, well, can you assure us, Mr Mayor, that Alderman's requests will be responded to in a timely fashion to ensure that Aldermen aren't embarrassed by the overly lengthy time it takes to get some of those responses back?
Thank you. General Manager.
Thank you for the question. Certainly our intention is to respond to Alderman's requests as soon as possible and to keep Aldermen informed of their progress. Over the last period since May, we've been working with a new system where the reporting mechanisms and tools that we had under the previous system weren't as well developed, and we've been working through trying to sort that out. If there is an Alderman's request that you're aware of that you think should have been responded to, we are more than happy to receive a reminder, but we are working to try and improve the system as quickly as we possibly can.
Did you have a second question?
Just to one, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I saw the ad for Hobart City Council on FOGO and their green waste. How are we going with FOGO so far?
Mr Graham, are you able to advise on where we might or might not be going on FOGO?
There's actually an answer from a question from last council meeting, so notes a little bit there. Previous workshop we talked about having going out with the community forum on our waste. The General Manager and I had further discussions in terms of how this fits in terms of our strategic plan, because there's a lot of happening in the waste space at the moment. Alberto and I last week went to a waste forum where there was active discussions on this matter. So I believe the General Manager and I will bring it to the council workshop on the strategic plans to look at where we are sitting with our waste and progressing in the short term.
Thank you.
Your second question is, what right have we got over developments the way they advertise their project? Because I saw this in the paper, but we don't seem to have any rights to say you should be, and I agree with some of the comments in this, that we don't seem to have any rights about how people should consult with things over, say, $5 million, because I think that needs to be, it seems to be the developer can have 2 hours here, 2 hours there, and that's it. To me, that is not good enough on a project, you know, say over $5, $6, $7 million. I think we need to discuss this probably at a workshop, because I think there needs to be a bit more. Yeah. Can we do something about it?
Can we discuss it at the workshop?
Can we discuss it?
No,
that's a good point. It's a really good point.
Yeah.
Well, let us. Can you talk to the General Manager about in more detail, and we'll get a program for discussion.
Sure.
No problem. Alderman Walker.
Yes, on Friday we were emailed the 40 pages, the TERT reports in relation to South Park Skate Park. South Park's, yeah, South Park related level of noise. No, it's a skate park at South Arm. We got the reports in relation to this. It's quite voluminous and has lots of pretty graphs. From all of that, can you tell us, are we now going to prioritise some of the acoustic mitigation measures to give some members of that community some peace of mind?
Mr. Graham, are you able to help us in that regard to that?
Through Mr Mayor, I understand from General Manager we're going to discuss that at a workshop in terms of possible options of where council will go from here following receiving the report.
Briefing with the options at a workshop soon.
That's good to hear. Like, not wanting to visit too much of the Taswater wars of times past, but noting there was a significant disruption to our community last week. It's my understanding that environmental health officers from Clarence really prioritised getting out and taking it to the forefront with particularly local businesses in that area to make them aware of that problem, even though that might not necessarily sit under their bailiwick.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. Where's the question?
Are you able to pass on council's thanks to those staff that undertook it?
Alderman Walker, I might add that their efforts went not unnoticed by the Health Department, and we've received thanks from them and from Taswater. They've been commended, and that's been passed on through me to them. But I'd be very happy to pass on also the commendation from this council collectively into regard their efforts, because it was quite outstanding. Okay, if we could make a note of that, please. Thank you, Alderman Walker. Alderman Kendi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Following on from the government's recent announcement to facilitate Tasmania's first ever dedicated greyhound rehoming facility, hopefully we'll continue to see many more of these beautiful dogs adopted into our city. Have we any plans to create an off-leash fenced area in the future for greyhounds in the city, as Launceston City Council has recently adopted unanimously?
Yes.
We might need to take that one on notice.
John Toohey's not here, but we will take it on notice. Thank you.
One more?
Yes.
Yes. When did, perhaps to General Manager through you, Mr Mayor, when did Council first become aware of the Royal Hobart Golf Club's new DA for a subdivision at 7 Mile Beach with access opposite Woodhurst Road in Lewis Avenue?
Mr Lovell may be able to add some further clarity, but my understanding is that we received the DA around March or April this year, but it had as a lot of these DAs do have, had quite a lot of additional information that was required, and that was obviously obtained at a point in time recently, and then the DA has been advertised. Is there anything further that you'd like to add, Mr Graham? Mr Lovell?
My question relates to, I'm somewhat surprised in the city like Clarence that, like other areas, we do not seem to have had a population of waterfowl like ducks and geese in our public areas and near things. So I'm just wondering, does council have any programs for managing the number of waterfowl such as ducks and geese?
Graham.
Through this now, I'll have to take that one. Sorry. and investigate that further.
There are a few councillors I wouldn't take advice from on that. Did you have another question?
Apart from asking the way a question like that needs to be done.
Okay, look, that brings us to the close of the open session. Could I thank the members of the public that have joined us tonight? And take a motion to move into closed session, please. Thank you. Alderman Pearce. Second to Alderman Bromley. All those in favour? Against? Carried.